Wow, Elokar is having a moment, isn't he? Oh boy, did this man go through some character development. The second thing that I want to talk about in regards to Kaladin is that he is unfortunately becoming a liberal. And let me expand on that. I love her so much. Oh my god. Women. Am I crazy for thinking Odium is a DILF? I don't think so.
And Dalinar was not loving his wife as he should have.
So number 1, Taravangian. I'm tired of him. The next thing I'm gonna talk about is Taravangian. Again. Everyone give a round of applause for Dalinar Kholin because he is finally becoming literate. Girl, I was screaming, crying, and throwing up. Hello everyone, my name is Nak and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today I am bringing you the first in many updates of me reading Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This has been something that a few of you have asked for, so I am working on it. It's a very long book. But basically, the format of this video is gonna be split up into 5 parts because there are 5 parts in the book. And after I finish reading each part, I'm sort of gonna sit down and discuss my thoughts about the previous part. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. I'm wearing the same clothes from the intro. That's because I actually filmed the intro and this part on the same day, because when I was recording this part, I finished part 1 yesterday. So let's talk about it. The first things I'm gonna talk about are like some smaller things, and if you weren't aware before, let me just say, huge disclaimer, spoiler warning for all of Oathbringer and Way of Kings and Words of Radiance in this entire video. If you haven't read any of those books, please stop watching now unless you want to get spoiled for like the entire Stormlight Archive. Stop watching, go read it, then come back, okay? Cool. If you're still here, I'm assuming that you've read at least up to this point in the Stormlight Archive. Hi, it's great to have you. So let's talk about this book. Number 1. Wow, Elokar is having a moment, isn't he? Before this book, I really didn't like Elokar, and listen, he was very whiny, he was very annoying, and he's very bad at his job, and like nobody come for me because objectively it's true. He is very bad at being the king of Alethkar, right? But like there was a moment in part 1 where he sat down with Dalinar and he literally was straight up like, yeah, I know I'm bad at my job and I know you would be a better king than me, so let's work something out. And it made my heart happy. Like, I felt my heart grow 3 sizes that day. It was very, very sweet, and I liked it, and it made me like him a little bit more, and it was very nice. Second, and this is my last spoiler warning, if you are somehow still here and you haven't read this book, please go now, or I will spoil Words of Radiance and Oathbringer for you right now, or at least Oathbringer up to part 1. So please, 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 if you are still here, don't. And you want to read the Stormlight Archive, be gone. Go. Gone. Okay. So Sanderson really tried to pull a fast one on me and make me believe that Jasnah Kholin was dead, huh? Like, he really thought I was gonna believe. Like, I'm gonna be completely honest. When I was reading Words of Radiance, I didn't believe Jasnah was dead. For 1 second, I didn't believe she was dead. And that's for 2 main reasons. Number 1, she is on the cover of Oathbringer, so like that was a pretty clear shot for me to know that she wasn't dead. But number 2 is that like, as a writer, as somebody who is written, as somebody who called themselves an author at one point in time, I knew from a writing standpoint that Yasna wasn't dead. Like, it just didn't make sense within the story. It didn't make sense narratively for her to be dead, especially at that point. If she wants to die later on, she can go for it. But for right there in that point, right after, you know, she and Shallan had made amends and come back together, after they had had all of the revelations about Shadesmar, it just didn't make sense for her to just up and die in that point in time, except for to, like, push Shallan into some character development, and that seemed really cheap, just to kill off a character like Yasna Kholin just so that Shallan would have character development. So I definitely knew she wasn't dead, and when she showed up back at the end of Words of Radiance, I knew she wasn't dead, and then she showed up again at the end of part 1 of Oathbringer, and I was like, wow, Yasna, you're alive? That's crazy. We thought you were dead this whole time. And it was a very miserable experience for me to read 2 books where, you know, everybody thinks she's dead. Adolin thinks she's dead. Navani thinks she's dead. Dalinar thinks she's dead. And her whole family and Shallan thinks she's dead. And I'm sitting here as the reader like, girl, she is alive and well. Well, she's definitely alive. Whether or not she's alive and well is to be seen, but she is alive, and that's what matters. And the last thing that I'm gonna say is, wow, I am suspicious of Taravangian. I don't know why, but I'm suspicious of him. I just had to put that out there. I had to put that out into the universe because I am suspicious of him. He's got schemes going on, and I don't trust a schemer. He's very suspicious. Something about him doesn't sit right with me. But we'll see what comes of that later on in the video. So for the big things, there are 3 big things that I want to talk about that happened in part 1. And each of those 3 things follows 3 characters: Shallan, Dalinar, and Kaladin. So I'm gonna start with Shallan first. So because I'm starting this sort of series in the middle of the Stormlight Archive, let me give y'all some background on my sort of thoughts and feelings about Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. The main thing in regards to Shallan from those 2 books is that I didn't like her. That's the main thing everybody needs to know when you're coming into Oathbringer with me. Know that in Way of Kings, I didn't like Shallan, and then in Words of Radiance, she was my favorite character, alright? So let's get that out of the way. At the beginning of Oathbringer, my heart was literally hurting for her because she is, I don't want to say coming to terms because she's not really coming to terms. She's coming to terms in her own way, okay? And she's dealing with the realization that she was the one who killed her mother, and, you know, Pattern is her shard blade, and all of that stuff is going on, and she is not coping well with any of this. She is coping, but not very well. I am not a mental health professional. I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I have no medical degree, but a lot of the, like, symptoms that she was exhibiting in part 1 and really at the end of Words of Radiance is really reminding me of people who I have talked to who have DID, or dissociative identity disorder, because she is, you know, she has 2 alternate identities at the very least. She might not, like, forget what she does when she is Veil or she's Radiant, but the fact that she is forcing herself into these 2 other personalities that are so different from her so she can escape the pain of that realization is just, it makes me so sad because it's not done in a healthy way. And I don't know what the mental health resources look like in Alethkar or on the Shattered Plains, but, like, as somebody who has come to really care about her character, it hurts my heart so much to see her deal with those things in such a negative way. Not that, you know, obviously not that having DID is inherently negative, but the way that Shallan is, like, dealing with this trauma and these realizations is very negative, and it's just, it makes sense for her character. So I'm not knocking it, but it's really, really sad, and I hope there's some light at the end of this tunnel for her, because in Words of Radiance, I really came to care about her as a character, and I hope that, you know, she is better. not saying that she has to be cured or anything, but like, you know, mental health wise, I hope that, you know, she gets to a better place than she is in right now. So the next character I'm gonna talk about is Dalinar Kholin. Okay, this is complicated for me because let me give you my background on how I felt about Dalinar in the first 2 books. Dalinar was one of my favorite characters immediately. Like, so quickly, I loved him. I loved his whole deal. I was obsessed with him. It is very much like a meme within my friend group that I love father figures, I love dads, and Dalinar Kholin is a capital D dad, and I love him for it. But in the first 2 books, there was always some inkling or some hint that there was something darker in his past that he felt a lot of shame for, that he was very guilty of, and we didn't know what that was until now. We're finally getting into Dalinar's past, and whoo boy, did this man go through some character development. I really love seeing the flashbacks of Dalinar when he was like younger. Like, these are flashbacks from 30 years ago or something, and so I really like seeing like what Dalinar was like before he was, you know, adhering to any codes, before Gavilar had gotten murdered, before he had any kids and all that type of stuff. And it's very interesting to see how different he is, because like, yeah, that Dalinar, that's the Blackthorn right there. I can definitely see it. He is cruel, he is ruthless, you know, he very much is almost addicted to the feeling of the thrill, and it's crazy to see how different past Dalinar and present Dalinar are, because they are almost 2 different men. But there's so much I have to say about Dalinar in part 1. I don't even know where to start. Let's first talk about how he now remembers who his wife is. So that was a shock to me. I was like minding my own business while I was reading the part where that gets revealed, and then Navani says that her name is Evie, and I was like, I was shocked. I was like, oh my god, that's his wife. And I don't know what's going on with all of the sort of memories that Dalinar is getting back, but I'm suspicious of it, because like everybody said, you know, this old magic isn't supposed to be undone. It's never supposed to stop working. It's a good thing that you know who your wife is, and I just think that it's very convenient that Dalinar starts remembering all these things about his first wife after he and Navani get married by literal God. So I don't trust it. I'm a little suspicious, but we'll see what comes of that later. The main thing I want to talk about is Dalinar's relationship with Gavilar, because wow. Siblings, huh? I have seen in the Cosmere circles, in the Stormlight Archives circles, that, you know, we don't really like Gavilar that much, and at this point in time, I don't know why we don't like Gavilar. Like, I trust everyone. You know, generally, I am not on the side of a king, I am not on the side of the monarchy, but I just want to see what happens for myself, and I'm a little, I'm starting to see the inklings of why we don't like Gavilar. So at the beginning of, you know, all of these flashbacks, I'm assuming that Dalinar and Gavilar are in their 20s. I don't really know how old Dalinar is. I'm assuming he's like in his 50s. And wow, these boys are ruthless. Those Kholin boys are ruthless. You know, they're literally like, I don't want to say colonizing. Colonizing seems very harsh of a word. They're sort of running a conquest across Alethkar. You know, it's a sort of join or die situation with everyone in Alethkar who isn't a Kholin. So that's kind of rough. But there was one moment at the about 100 pages into the book that I was listening to on Libby, and it literally like made my breath leave my lungs. I was shocked and speechless that this right here was Dalinar Kholin. So I read that and I was like, girl, Dalinar is a beast, and not in a good way. I'm curious to see what happens, like what else will be revealed about him in the rest of the book if these flashbacks continue. I'm really curious to see like what else gets revealed, because present Dalinar, it's very obvious that he's carrying around grief, he's carrying around shame and sorrow and all of these negative emotions that are weighing him down. And so now that we're getting a chance to see, you know, what happened to him to make him feel all of those things, it's stressful. As a Dalinar Colin enjoyer, it's very stressful. The last character that I'm gonna talk about is my formerly beloved Kaladin Stormblessed. Yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings about Mr. Stormblessed at this point in time. Hopefully those feelings turn back to mostly positive by the end of the book, but girl, who knows? With this trajectory that he's on, The first thing that I want to talk about in regards to Kaladin is how, at least in my opinion, I feel like he is right back at the beginning of his character arc. At the beginning of Way of Kings, he was very much... He felt that he was responsible for the death of his brother Tien. He felt like it was his fault, and he also felt like because of that, in order to sort of repent for that failure in his mind, that he had to protect those around him and that everyone's life was his responsibility. And then over the course of Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, he was sort of coming out of that and like not shouldering the responsibility for everybody else. And now it's coming back because he goes back to his hometown and he sees that his mom has had another child, which means that he has a little brother, much like Tien. And so now he's like, I'm going to protect you. I'm gonna protect everyone. And when I saw that, I was like, oh no, this is not gonna end well. This is not gonna go well for anyone. Somebody's gonna die and Kaladin is gonna get, you know, dragged back into a deep dark depression just like he was in Way of Kings. So I'm not excited to see that. Unless it doesn't happen and my prediction is just totally wrong, which is great, and I would love that for him. The second thing that I want to talk about in regards to Kaladin is that he is unfortunately becoming a liberal. And let me expand on that. After he leaves his hometown, he is on his way back to Yurthiru, and on that way back, he runs into a group of escaped Parshmen, Parshendi, I guess, and they're runaway slaves, and they're going to this settlement that has a bunch of other Parshmen. Kaladin, I don't know how to word this, but it's like mansplaining but for oppression, if that makes sense. And it was really annoying me how Kaladin was trying to equate his life experiences to that of all of these Parshendi, and I'm just like, babe, how are you not realizing how dumb you sound? Like, you, my friend, sound really privileged, and I'm gonna need you to walk some of that back. It was really getting on my nerves because when I was reading the first 2 books of the Stormlight Archive, it was very clear to me, and this might not be the intention of Sanderson. Obviously, when you read something, you bring your own experiences and your own like biases to whatever you read, but to me it felt very clear that the Parshendi were like fantasy stand-ins for Black people, and this thought was compounded by the fact that whenever people draw art of the Parshendi, it's y'all are just drawing Black people, right? And so I felt a lot of kinship to characters like Vinley and Eshonai, because in my head I'm like, these are just Black people, right? And so to see Kaladin, somebody from outside of that community, come into that community and just be like, oh yeah, I understand your struggle, I understand exactly what you've been through, and it's just like, no you don't. And once again, I'm not going to negate the fact that Kaladin was a slave, and you know, he obviously has the brands on his forehead and all of that stuff, but you have to acknowledge that in this hierarchy, a Dark Eyes is still way, way above a Parshendi or a Parshman. And so seeing Kaladin be like, I understand what you went through, I was a slave too, I know exactly what you're going through, and I'm just like, no you don't, no you, what? No, and it feels very weird to have Kaladin of all characters express those sort of feelings, because Kaladin is the leader of Bridgefour. You know, he's the one who allowed R'laine to come into Bridgefour. He allowed Renarin to come into Bridgefour. You know, it's sort of, you know, we don't turn anyone away. We're not going to judge you for your past and all that type of stuff. So I was really shocked to have him come out and just frankly, be very cringe. And it annoyed me because Kaladin was literally my favorite character, and now it just seems like he's a whole different person. And it's very annoying to me. So I hope he gets over that. I hope he gets over that quick, fast, and in a hurry. Or else I will literally jump into this book and beat him up. But let's talk about the interlude. Specifically, let's talk about interlude 3, because I need to put this right out here in the open so that I'm either right later on in the video, or I am a clown and there is egg on my face later in the video. In interlude 3, the POV character is Vinley. Allegedly, Eshonai is dead. Girl, I don't believe that for 1 second. I know her body was right there and we were looking at her, but I don't believe it. I call BS on that. Yeah, is this gonna be the pattern for the rest of the series? Is that every book you're gonna try to convince me that one strong female character is dead? Like, who is it gonna be in Rhythm of War? Navani? Good God. I'm tired of Sanderson trying to trick me into thinking that he's killing off all of the female characters that I like, cause girl, not me. But now that we've got that out of the way, I'm gonna send it over to part 2 Mac to give you all of the thoughts and reactions that part 1 Mac has not experienced yet. So I'll see you then. Finished part 2 of Oathbringer, the interludes included, and we're just gonna get into it, okay? The first thing I want to talk about is Evie and Dalinar. Evie deserves a better husband than Dalinar Kholin, and I think that present day Dalinar probably would have been a better husband to past Evie than past Dalinar was to past Evie. I think that 50-year-old Dalinar and Evie would have got along nicely, but like 25-year-old Dalinar, who like low-key has like depression and PTSD and is like hyper masculine, is not a good fit for her, and she deserves better. However, speaking about Dalinar, there is one thing that I want to point out that like literally brought me to my knees when I was listening to the audiobook, and that is when Adolin was born. That scene broke me into pieces. I was on the ground. There was a moment where it was like Dalinar fell to his knees at the side of the bed, and I was literally falling to my knees at the side of my bed, because it was something about how Dalinar up until that point had felt that, you know, his life was very monotonous, it was boring, he was bored, he was getting depressed because he couldn't fight, you know, he was going without feeling the thrill for all of that time. And then his son was born, and then he named his son Born Unto Light. It broke me into pieces. That was absolutely precious, and I love it. I loved it. It was great. Dalinar continuing to be one of my favorite characters in this series. The next thing that I want to talk about is the love of my life, Jasnah Kholin. Hello, she is back from the dead. She never died. We all knew she was alive, but she is back from the dead, and God, I have missed her. It's been like it's felt like it's been an entire book since Jasnah has been on screen, as it were, and I missed her so much. I love her so much. Oh my God. There was like a moment in the latter half of part 2 where she was having an arguing match with Amaram. Disgusting, but that's not the point, because she literally dragged his name through the mud. She embarrassed him in front of all of those people. She embarrassed him in front of Shallan. She embarrassed him in front of Navani, and it was just like, women. The next thing that I want to talk about is this one might be controversial, but I like Moash quite a bit. Moash was one of my early favorite characters. Like when I first started reading Way of Kings and Moash showed up, and I was like, ooh, who is he? He doesn't like Kaladin like the rest of Bridgefour. Who is this man in a leather jacket in the corner of the bar? Like who is that? And so I've always liked Moash for like most of the series. And now Moash is in his villain era, and that's okay, because I don't really think he's a villain. Like, I was talking about this book to one of my friends, and I said something like, I hope that Sanderson doesn't do what a lot of Marvel movies do, by which I mean you have the villain be sympathetic to the audience. Like, the goal of the villain is something that is objectively good. Like, we can all agree that the villain's goal is good. And sometimes the villain and the protagonist even have the same goal, but the difference is the villain goes about it in some incredibly detestable and violent way so that the audience doesn't agree with the villain and instead agrees with the hero. And I was like, I hope Sanderson doesn't do that with Kaladin and Moash, because they seem to want the same thing, because they are both going through like a moment of realization where they're both realizing, oh, the way that we treat the Parshindi and the Parshmen is dumb. The whole hierarchy based on eye color is dumb. And they both have that realization. But the way that Moash is going about acting on that realization is different than Kaladin is doing it. Because Kaladin is acting on those feelings within the system that already exists. You know, he goes back to Uruthero and he's telling the rest of the group, like, hey, this is what I learned. I talked to these people. I found out this. Maybe we were wrong. Moash, on the other hand, is like, I feel like about to start an armed rebellion, which is a little less tasteful than how Kaladin was trying to go about it. But Moash isn't wrong. He's just doing it differently, and I don't even think that the way he's doing it is necessarily bad. It's just, I hope that Moash gets treated nicely in the rest of the series, and I hope that Kaladin isn't like awful, by which I mean Kaladin right now is giving me the same vibe as people who are saying you just need to get out there and vote in response to the Supreme Court or overturning Roe v. Wade. Like, that's not gonna do anything. So anyway, the last thing that I want to talk about in regards to part 2 is I love that Bridgefour is a POV in this part, and I think that they're going to be a POV in later parts as well, and I just love it. In part 2, I think the characters that we got were Sigzil, Rock, Scar, Teft, R'laine, and Moash, and I'm so upset. Bridgefour is like actually my favorite characters in the whole series. Like, them as a group is my favorite character, and so I love how there was little moments where we got to see into each of their heads, because that is like a perspective that we haven't gotten. It's been Bridgefour filtered through Kaladin, and like that's it. And then there was not a lot of Bridgefour content in Words of Radiance because Kaladin was like gone for whole chunks of it. I just love that we got to see into their heads, and especially R'laine. I want more R'laine content, please. Like, he's so, I love him, and I want more of him, please. Also, I said that was the last thing that I was going to talk about, but I actually thought of 2 more things that I want to talk about. The next thing I want to talk about is how Sanderson is balancing the fact that this is a fantasy world and bringing in real world elements that make it grounded in reality, because Roshar as a setting for the story is insane. Coming from, you know, Earth, you know, Roshar is insane. The Shattered Plane doesn't have grass. Like, it's kind of crazy. And so getting this big sweeping epic fantasy where there are like demigods trying to keep demons from coming out of hell, but in the process they go mad, is one thing. And then on the other side you also have, you know, Dalinar and like Kaladin have PTSD. Renarin used to have epilepsy and like is autistic coded. He's autistic because I want him to be autistic. Teft has a drug addiction. Shallan has showing symptoms of like DID or some other personality disorder, and it's very grounded in reality while also being this big sweeping fantasy epic. And for me, I feel like it would be difficult to balance, but Sanderson does it so well that I am able to lay on the ground about a first-time father holding his son after he was born and then try to explain who the heralds are to somebody who hasn't read the Stormlight Archive. The last thing that I'm gonna talk about is the fact that, okay, listen, Odium. Let's talk about Odium. And specifically, am I crazy for thinking Odium is a DILF? I don't think so. Because I was listening to the audiobook for the whole chunk, the last couple chapters in part 2, where like Odium was talking directly to Dalinar. And I was like listening to the audiobook in the grocery store with my mom, and I was just like, I'm picking up on I'm getting a DILF vibe from this. It's the way Michael Kramer was reading it, okay? Maybe the dialogue itself isn't DILFy, but like Michael Kramer put some stank on there that made me like take notice. And I don't know if that was a tactic. You know, I don't trust Odium. You know, he's kind of winning me over to his side. I trust Odium more than I trust the Stormfather. For some reason, he's so charismatic. And I'm just... Anyway, I'm gonna get to reading part 3. And I'll see you guys when I get done reading that. Whew.
Hi, this is Editing Mac. Throughout this entire section, I keep saying part 4 when I really mean part 3. So I'm really sorry about that because it is confusing for both you and me to hear. So I'm talking about part 3 this whole time, not part 4. Part 4 is in a bathtub, so you'll know when that happens. So this update is a little weird because I just woke up. Which is why I'm still in bed, but I finished part 4 of Oathbringer last night, which is why I'm doing this the next morning, so all of the thoughts are still fresh in my head. If you're keeping up with where I am in the book, you know that there's a very big thing that happened at the end of part 4, and I'm going to talk about that last. But for now, the main thing that I'm going to touch on is Evie and Dalinar's relationship. I don't even know what to say. There was a specific chapter in part 4 that made me so angry, I had to like put the book down for 45 minutes to an hour and like calm down. It made me so angry because at my core, one of my favorite types of characters is a man who loves his wife. And Dalinar was not loving his wife as he should have in this specific instance, or in probably their entire marriage, let's be real. And it was just so infuriating to watch the way that Dalinar was treating Evie. And I'm like, that's your wife. Like, what are you doing? That your job is to love and cherish her, and you can't even like her. You can't even be nice to her. Like, y'all aren't even acquaintances. Like, I don't. And then of course the big reveal about how Evie died. I cried. Some tears were shed. There was a lot of screaming. I think I was doing laundry while I was listening to that part of the audiobook, and when it happened, I like did a double take and like went back and listened to it again because I was like, whew, yeah, I see why Dalinar was like, I don't want to remember this anymore because traumatic. Evie deserved better. Evie deserved better. Is all I have to say. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is Shallan, but I'm really going to talk about Wit, because, wow, there was just, I feel like a lot of Shallan's character was building up to the conversation that she was having with Wit after the stuff with Vale and the food went over badly. I just feel like
that was going to happen sooner rather than later. And the way that it happened destroyed me. Like, hearing Wit talk Shalon through all of her feelings and all of her trauma and how she was dealing with that trauma literally made me cry. Like, I was minding my own business, making myself a pizza for dinner, and Wit is dropping so much knowledge and so much tenderness and care to Shalon that I just sat down on the floor to cope, because it was so much, but it was so good. And I'm glad that Shalon is feeling better. I don't know if better is the right word, because like a lot of things with mental illness and trauma, it doesn't go away immediately, but she's at least taking steps to improve, and that made me really happy. So let's talk about the end of part 4. So there was a lot of stuff going on in Kholinar at the end of this part, and let's get it out of the way. I called Moash killing Elhokar. Like, I predicted it. Like, right before it happened, when like all of the Parshendi were storming the city, I was like, haha, wouldn't it be funny if Moash showed up? And then he did, and I just it was a lot. I think I cried, maybe not out of sadness, but just like out of overwhelming emotions. I was just shocked by so much of the stuff that was going on. Obviously, Moash killed Elhokar. Kaladin somehow, after 20 years, is finally realizing the horrors of war. It's like he finally is unable to make the us versus them distinction, and that made it very difficult for him, which I understand as like a part of his character is very important, but when that happened, I was like, man, come on, how have you not done that already? You know, like, I feel like we should have made this realization by now, but apparently he didn't. The stuff with Aesudan was also crazy, but I called it. I was like, oh, she's like possessed or something, and she was. When I finished part 4, I had to take a break, because I had to just like lay down, because I felt tired, because so much happened. So much was going on, and I just needed a break. And then I read the interludes. So let's talk about Vinley. I have come to accept that Eshonai is actually dead, which makes me mad, because I think this might have been something that Vinley actually said, where she was like, the wrong sister died. And I agree, because so much of what is happening is Vinley's fault. Almost everything that's happening in regards to Odium and the Parshendi is Vinley's fault. And just now, she's starting to feel regret and remorse for it. And I'm like, girl, the time for that was so long ago. Like, you should have listened to your sister so long ago. And now, you look stupid. Okay, every time I said part 4, I actually meant part 3. I am now going to start reading part 4, and I will give you guys an update when I'm done with that. So I am about halfway through part 4, and I have Mel Reads hanging out with me while I read. Listening to the audiobook, something that I wanted to point out is that it's really weird that Kaladin, Azure, Adolin, and Shalon are all in Shadesmar together, because I can hear Syl's dialogue being read by Kate Reading and Pattern's dialogue being read by Michael Kramer, which is really weird, because usually when there's Pattern, it's a Shalon chapter, so it's being read by Kate Reading, who is a woman, even though Pattern is a male, I guess. And then usually when there's Syl, it's a Kaladin chapter, so it's being read by Michael Kramer. But now that they're all in Shadesmar together, this is the first time that I've heard Syl's dialogue being read by a woman and Pattern's dialogue being read by a man, and I don't know, it's not weird, it's not bad, it's just like, wow, I've never noticed how I've always had the opposite until now because it's different. It's a little weird, but in a good way.
We're in the bathtub. You may be wondering, why are you in a bathtub? Don't worry about it. So I finished part 4 last night, and I tried to film this part once already at like 2 o'clock in the morning, but I'm deciding to redo it, and I have notes this time, so let's talk about what happened in part 4, okay? So number 1, Taravangian. I'm tired of him. I'm exhausted by him. He makes me tired. And like I'm frustrated that Dalinar had his whole coalition together. Like it was ready to go. They were working together. People who had never made alliances were thinking about making alliances with each other. It was great. Like almost the entire continent of Roshar had come together, right, to fight this common enemy. And then here comes Taravangian with his schemes and his plans and his plots. I'm tired. The thing that makes me the most exhausted is not even that he's plotting and scheming in the first place. It's the fact that I don't know why. To what end does he scheme? I don't know. And that bothers me. Like, I feel like I would be less upset if I knew why he was scheming. And I could maybe even get behind his schemes. And listen, it fully might have been revealed already and I just forgot or wasn't paying attention. These books are long. Cut me some slack. The next thing that I'm gonna talk about is, listen, don't come for me if you really, really like Shallan and Adolin as a couple. I had not been convinced that those two were actually in love with each other until part 4 of this book. And it's not of my own volition. I didn't have a choice. Sanderson keeps shoving it down my throat, and so I'm like, okay, God, they're in love. I'm convinced, I guess. But what I'm not convinced by is that they aren't also kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit into Kaladin, and Kaladin is maybe kind of, sort of into them. It's very bisexual, okay? And I love it, but I want something to come of it. Because I don't want Shallan and Adolin to be together unless Kaladin is also with them. I might be putting clown makeup on my face, but like, I don't care. They all need to hold hands. Everyone has 2 hands. There was one part in this section where Adolin realized that he was next in line for the throne, and I was like, Adolin? Like, no shade to my boy, I love him so much, but he is not king material whatsoever. I'm like, well, Elhokar is dead, his son is gone, Dalinar is abdicating, Adolin should not be king, Renarin is definitely not gonna be king. Oh, if only there was someone else who should be king. King Yasna Kholin, please. I think that Yasna should be king or queen or ruler, whatever. She would do great. She would be really good at it, and so I hope that's what happens. The next thing that I'm gonna talk about is a little heavy, and I'm gonna put a trigger warning for alcoholism in this section. I'll put up the cover of the book here, and so once it's gone away, I'm done talking about that. So if you want to skip this section, then definitely do that. Take care of yourself. So I want to talk about Dalinar, and I want to talk about Teft. I want to talk about both of them because those are 2 characters that I really like and really care about for pretty much the same reason. They are both like older men, like fatherly figures who are dealing with a lot of problems and a lot of guilt and have turned to substance abuse in order to deal with that. And it's heartbreaking, but I also hope that both of those characters deal with their respective issues in coming books. And I hope that they are both treated kindly and treated well because I care about the both of them very much. For pretty much the same reason. Like, Dalinar is literally, I think, I'm gonna say this with certainty, Dalinar is my favorite character in the series, and
Teft was also immediately one of my favorite characters. Like, as soon as he got introduced, I saw through that grizzled old man act. I knew that he was gonna become like a father figure to the rest of Bridge 4, because he's like the oldest member, and I'm obsessed with both of them, and I hope that they both get well, because they both deserve it. They're both very good men, even if they don't realize it yet, but they are both on the path to becoming good men. That was really cheesy at the end, but... Okay, and the last thing that I'm gonna talk about in regards to part 4 is heavy spoilers for the entire Stormlight Archive. I know I've already said that somewhere in this video before, but like, this is like the whole really probably the biggest spoiler that I'm gonna talk about so far. And this might turn into a little bit of a rant, but I need to get it off my chest. It was revealed at the end of part 4 that the humans are in fact the invaders and the colonizers of Roshar, and the Parshindi were actually like the native people of the continent. And when it got revealed, it was treated as if it was supposed to be shocking, but to me, it was very obvious. Not because of any like breadcrumbs that Sanderson had laid in any particular fashion, but just because when white men write fantasy books, that is a very common plot point that they go to. That's something that happens a lot when white men write fantasy, because I think it's safe to say that white men often use fantasy as a genre to explore systems of oppression that they themselves don't experience. They'll like use fantasy races like elves or dwarves or orcs or goblins or what have you to represent real life groups of people, and then explore various avenues of oppression like xenophobia or homophobia or racism, classism, misogyny, etc. that they might not experience in real life. So when everybody was like, oh my god, we were the bad guys all along, I was like, yeah, it was painfully obvious the way that humans treated the Parshindi, that they were not the original people there. And I don't know if Sanderson wanted it to be obvious, or if, you know, he was trying to be more subtle with it, but to me, the whole reveal and shock fell flat, because, like, of course that was gonna be what was happening. Like, there was no other explanation for what was going on besides that. Anyway, I'm done. I'm gonna read part 5, and I'm gonna be very normal about it. I'm tired. Generally, I think I'm a pretty fast reader. Like, no matter the length of a book, it usually takes me 3 to 5 days to read it. It took me 3 weeks to read this book, but now I'm done, so I'm gonna talk about it. There are a few smaller things that I'm gonna mention right up top. One, I predicted Yasna becoming the ruler of Alethkar like 4 days ago, and I feel very proud of myself because I don't ever usually predict things. Lift and Zeth need to be in like some buddy cop comedy, because their dynamic in the like when they were having the whole battle was absolutely hilarious, and I want more of it, please. Everyone give a round of applause for Dalinar Kholin, because he is finally becoming literate. And the last thing that I'm going to say is probably gonna like upset the people who are super hardcore Cosmere fans. I started with the Stormlight Archive, so like I haven't read any other Sanderson books besides these 3 books, so I don't know any of the cameos or the references to other books that are going on. So I was very confused by the epilogue. Like that, I don't know what was going on there. I'm sure someone will tell me, but that was confusing. So now let's get into like the actual nitty-gritty of what I thought about part 5. okay? The first thing that I want to talk about is all of the like parallels that were being drawn between characters, and maybe these parallels don't actually exist, but at least when I was reading it, I was like, oh my god, look at the juxtaposition of Amaram and Dalinar and their relationship to Odium, because girl, I was screaming, crying, and throwing up. Okay, because at least in my understanding of what was going on, it really felt like the antagonist of the series so far was just not taking responsibility for your actions. Either that or guilt, because I feel like every main character had some guilt in some capacity. Like, obviously Dalinar felt very guilty about what he did to Evie. Shallan felt guilty about killing her parents. Kaladin felt guilty about letting his little brother die. Adolin and Renarin felt guilty for not living up to their father's expectations in one way or another. So, like, everyone feels some modicum of guilt, but the difference between Dalinar and Amaram is that Dalinar ended up taking ownership of that guilt and taking responsibility for his actions, and Amaram didn't, because that literally seems to be like what Odium was doing. It's just like he's going to different people who have that weakness of guilt and being like, I can take this away from you. You don't have to be responsible for what you did. It's not your fault. Let me deal with it instead. That way you don't have to feel guilty. Except for you literally cannot grow as a person unless you take responsibility for your actions. And that's what Dalinar was talking about with the whole, like, that's literally what the whole journey before destination means. Strength before weakness. I'm going insane in real time. The next thing that I'm gonna talk about is, I think, a little funny, because I'm like just starting to read new adult and like adult books. So me personally, I've never read a book where anyone got married, and now Shallan and Adolin are like getting married, and for some reason I read that and I was like, what? What do you mean you're getting married? You can't get married. You're like babies. Except for like, no, they're not. They're adults. Well, okay, I think Shallan is either the same age as me or she is very close in age to me, so it feels weird to be like, oh my god, Shallan's getting married? Can I get married? The next thing I'm gonna talk about is Taravangian. Again, because he is still causing problems. Now that his schemes have somewhat been explained, I can understand why he was scheming, which is literally all I needed this whole time. But now the fact that he's like all buddy-buddy with Odium, and the fact that he's gonna throw away all of humanity in return for Odium like sparing Kharbranth, like what the I don't understand why we can't just kill Taravangian. Like, homie is old, he is decrepit, he is ancient. Like, can't he is actively laying on his deathbed, and y'all keep letting him get up for why? He is causing problems for the entire continent, and y'all still let this old man walk around for why? I'm exhausted by him, truly. And the last thing that I'm gonna talk about is, wow, Sanderson writes some long books, huh? The previous two books, I could sort of understand their length because everything in them seemed like it had a reason to be there. But Oathbringer was just, it was dragging on there at the end. For me, at least, I just felt like it just kept going and going and going. And like some of the stuff that was going on in the last bit, like the very end of part 5, felt like the end credit scenes in a Marvel movie. It's like, if you've left the theater by now, you got what you paid for, so you're not missing anything. You can just look up the summary of these events later. But the fact that they were just there, it was just kept dragging on, and I was like, why can't this man let a book be over? And there was even a moment in like the middle of part 5 where I fully thought like it was the end of the book, because I was listening to the audiobook and then it just kept going, and I was like, he could have ended it right here, but he didn't. And it felt like the Oathbringer as a whole feels like the end of the series, at least to me. Like, yeah, there are some loose ends, but like it's not imperative that they be be tied up. If you told me that the Stormlight Archive was a trilogy and Oathbringer was the last book, I would believe you. It feels done. It feels very over, but it's still going. Like, how are you gonna write 1,000 more pages of story when that was how it ended? I don't understand. And like, I'm really nervous to read Rhythm of War because I've heard a lot of people say that it was too long. And like, if the Stormlight Archive people are saying a book is too long, you know it's too long because we are actively choosing to read 1,000+ page books for fun. I'm tired. But I mean, that was Oathbringer, and as much as I've complained while reading it, I do think that this is my favorite book out of the 3 that I've read. It was hitting, it gave what needed to be given. It was everything I could have ever asked for and more. Like, I love it so much, and I'm excited but also nervous to read Rhythm of War. But I won't be reading Rhythm of War for a long time. Like, Oathbringer took a lot out of me, and I need a break to like read some normal length books for a minute. If you don't hear about Rhythm of War for like at least 2 months, don't worry about it. It's fine. I forgot to film an outro, so join me on the floor while I do that. Thank you so much for watching this very, very long video. If you're here, comment a sword emoji, so I know that you watched me suffer for an hour. Follow me on Instagram and Goodreads, and now Twitter. I'm on Twitter now, so if you want to follow me on all of those websites, the links will be in the description. That is where you will find a ton of more unhinged bookish content that you just will not get here. I need to take a nap. I feel like I need to take a nap. If you have any suggestions for what types of videos you want to see from me next, also leave them down in the comments below. That is all. Goodbye.